The Texas sun was merciless that afternoon. Near Fort Griffin, the prairie stretched beneath a burning sky. 60-year-old Elias Mercer was checking his horse when he heard something unusual in the wind. Then he saw her. A young woman was hanging from a low oak branch by one arm. A rope was tied tightly around her wrist. Her dress was torn from struggling, and dust covered her skin. She was exhausted, frightened, and humiliated. For one terrible moment, Elias stared. He saw more than he should have seen. Then the woman's voice struck him like a knife. "Don't look!" Elias immediately turned his head away. Shame burned across his face. He had been alone for years. His wife had died long ago, leaving him with an empty house and long nights. But loneliness was no excuse for forgetting another person's dignity. Without looking back, Elias removed his old coat and held it toward her. "Cover yourself," he said quietly. "I won't look again." The woman hesitated before taking it. She wrapped the coat around herself like a shield. Only then did Elias approach the rope. He examined the knot carefully. His expression changed. The knot was clean and professional. Whoever had tied it knew exactly what they were doing. This hadn't been an accident. Someone had deliberately left her there. Elias pulled his knife and cut the rope. The woman nearly collapsed. He caught her by the elbow, just long enough to keep her standing, then stepped back and gave her room. "They left me here," she whispered. "Who?" "I don't know all their names. They said they'd come back." Elias looked at the ground. 3 sets of horse tracks. Maybe 4. All heading north. "They don't want you going north," he said. The woman looked at him sharply. "No," she replied. "They don't. What's your name?" "Clara. Clara Voss." Elias nodded. "Then we'd better move, Clara. They'll be back." They rode until the heat became unbearable. Elias eventually turned away from the main trail and led Clara into a shallow draw where tall grass provided cover. He had used the place as a camp many times. There was a small fire ring, a canvas shelter, and a nearby water source. Elias checked the ground. A broken grass stem. A boot mark. A stone that had recently been kicked aside. Someone had been watching them. He found a fresh cut on a nearby tree. A warning. Elias didn't panic. He simply adjusted the canvas and made a small area of shade. "Water's close," he said. "Rest here." Clara slowly climbed down from the horse. Her legs shook beneath her. Elias handed her dried meat and his canteen. "Eat." She did. After a few minutes, she looked at him. "Why are you helping me?" Elias stared into the small fire ring. "Because I've been the man who looked the other way before." Clara waited. "It cost someone more than it ever cost me," he continued. "I've regretted it ever since." Before she could ask more, they heard horses. 3 riders appeared on the ridge. The man in front was Jeb Rusk. Lean, dangerous, and smiling. "Well now," Jeb called. "Looks like you picked up something that ain't yours, old man." Elias stepped forward. "She needed water." "She belongs to someone up north." Elias's voice remained calm. "She doesn't belong to anyone." Jeb laughed. One of his men reached toward the canvas shelter. Elias moved instantly. He caught the man's wrist, twisted it, and dropped him into the dust. No gun. No unnecessary violence. Just a warning. Jeb raised his hand. "That's enough." He stared at Elias. "Didn't know you were that kind of old." Elias didn't move. "This isn't finished," Jeb said. "No," Elias replied. "It isn't." The riders backed away. But Elias knew they would return. The next morning, Clara finally explained why they were after her. She was carrying documents. Not ordinary papers. a land survey, and a railroad document bearing an official seal. The papers proved that a powerful businessman named Wade Hollister was trying to steal land from several families by manipulating legal records. Hollister had money, connections, and men willing to do his dirty work. Clara had discovered the scheme and tried to take the evidence north. That's why they had caught her. That's why they had tied her to the tree. And that's why they wanted her silent. Elias looked toward the northern horizon. "We're going to Dodge City." Clara's face tightened. "That's where they'll be waiting." "Exactly. Why go there?" "Because that's where people ask questions." He paused. "And sometimes questions are louder than guns." On the trail, Elias and Clara joined a small cattle drive. Among the drovers was a narrow-faced man named Lem Carter. He smiled too quickly and watched Clara too carefully. Elias noticed. He said nothing. That night, the cattle suddenly panicked. A rope had been cut. A whip cracked in the darkness. Men shouted as the animals scattered. Elias immediately put himself between Clara and the confusion. By morning, 2 cattle were missing. But Elias discovered something worse. The document in Clara's saddle was gone. Clara looked at him. "They took it." Elias looked toward Lem. Lem immediately looked away. Elias didn't accuse him. Instead, Clara created a trap. She deliberately let Lem see her hiding what appeared to be another important document. That night, Lem took the bait. He slipped away from camp. Elias followed. Near a quiet creek, he confronted him. Lem broke quickly. He confessed that Hollister had bought his debt and ordered him to watch Clara. "I didn't want anyone hurt," Lem said. Elias took the stolen document. Then he stepped aside. "Run." Lem stared at him. "Why?" "Because the next man who finds you may not be as forgiving." Lem disappeared into the darkness. 3 days later, Dodge City appeared on the horizon. Smoke from the railroad rose into the sky. Cattle filled the pens. Men shouted prices. Money changed hands. Elias immediately realized that this was a different kind of battlefield. On the open trail, men trusted guns. In Dodge City, paper could be more dangerous. Clara kept her hat low. Elias watched the crowd carefully. Then he noticed a young boy standing near the freight office. The boy held a broom, but wasn't sweeping. Every few seconds, he looked toward Clara, then toward her coat. Elias understood. Someone had ordered the boy to watch her. A moment later, Deputy Frank Malloy stepped from behind the freight office. He wore a clean vest and a polished badge. "Welcome to Dodge," he said with a friendly smile. "Here to sell cattle?" "That's right," Elias answered. Malloy looked at Clara. "Miss here seems shaken." "She's been traveling a long way." Malloy smiled. "Town ordinance says unattached young women causing a disturbance can be held until things are cleared up." Clara immediately understood what was happening. Elias did too. "This ain't a disturbance," he said. Malloy's smile became thinner. "Then we'll sort it out." Clara was taken into custody. She didn't resist. Minutes later, Elias was arrested too. The charges were carefully chosen: kidnapping, possession of stolen documents, improper conduct. Everything sounded official. But Elias knew the truth. The law had been bought. Wade Hollister arrived before sunset. He wore a black hat and a gray coat. He walked through the square as if he owned the town. A rope had been placed around a wooden beam. It wasn't being used. Not yet. It was simply a warning. Hollister approached Elias. "A man lives 60 years, he said, "and throws everything away over one foolish mistake." Elias said nothing. "You picked up a girl. You carried papers that don't belong to you." Hollister stepped closer. Sign a statement. Say you found the papers. Say you meant no harm. You will walk away embarrassed, but alive. Elias looked at the rope, then at Clara, then back at Hollister. No. Hollister's expression hardened. You should think carefully. I already have. Clara understood that fighting Hollister with violence would only make things worse. So she chose another weapon. The truth. She found an old printer and a lawyer whose hands were weak but whose mind was sharp. She showed them the railroad seal. The lawyer immediately understood its importance. If this is genuine, he said, Hollister has a serious problem. Clara nodded. He knows it. Meanwhile, Hollister offered Clara another deal. She could sign a statement saying she had traveled willingly with him and that Elias had kidnapped her. In return, Elias would be released. Clara would disappear. She looked across the square at Elias. He slowly shook his head. No. Neither of them would trade the truth for safety. That night, Clara entered the loudest saloon in Dodge City. Smoke filled the room. Cards slapped tables. Music played. Men shouted. At the bar sat Lem Carter. Clara took the seat beside him. You didn't take everything, she said. Lem looked nervous. You don't know what you're involved in. I know exactly what I'm involved in. She showed him a corner of the document. I also know who sent you. Lem swallowed. Before he could answer, chairs scraped against the floor. Hollister's men had arrived. The first punch landed. Then the entire saloon erupted. Tables overturned. Glass shattered. Men pushed and shouted. Clara ducked behind the bar. Someone grabbed her arm. She turned. It was Elias. He had escaped from the jail. Malloy had left the latch unsecured for a brief moment, and Elias had taken his chance. He pulled Clara away from the fighting and placed his coat around her shoulders. Again, the same coat, the same promise. They escaped through the kitchen. Outside, the air was cooler. But they weren't safe. Lem came running after them. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said. They said nobody would get hurt. Elias held out his hand. The document. Lem hesitated. Then he handed it over. Suddenly, a whistle cut through the night. Deputies appeared at both ends of the alley. Malloy stood among them, and Wade Hollister stepped into the light. This has become unnecessarily messy, Hollister said. Elias stared at him. You don't mind messy? He paused. You just don't like witnesses. Hollister smiled. This ends tonight. Clara stepped forward. She reached inside the coat and pulled out the second document. The sealed document. The one Hollister didn't know they still had. This goes to the railroad, she said. Hollister's smile vanished. By then, people had gathered. Railroad workers, cattle buyers, drovers, shopkeepers. Too many witnesses. Hollister looked at Malloy. For the first time, the deputy looked uncertain. Malloy cleared his throat. Let's take this to the cattle pens. Hollister wanted to refuse, but refusing in front of the crowd would make him look weak. So they walked. At the cattle pens, lanterns burned brightly. Men gathered in a circle. Elias stepped into the center. He raised both hands. They were empty. No gun. No knife. Nothing. Then he began to speak. He told them about the tree, about Clara, about the rope, and about his own mistake. He admitted that when he first saw her, he had looked where he shouldn't have looked. He didn't excuse himself. He didn't blame loneliness. He didn't pretend it hadn't happened. He admitted that he was ashamed. Then he told them what he did afterward. He covered her. He cut the rope. He gave her space. He protected her. And he continued north even though he knew it could cost him everything. The crowd listened. Then Clara stepped forward. She held up the sealed document. The railroad workers recognized the seal. The printer knew exactly what it meant. The lawyer stepped forward and confirmed the document's importance. Hollister finally understood. He couldn't buy his way out anymore. There were too many witnesses. Too much evidence. Too much truth. Malloy looked around. Then he spoke. "This will be handled properly." Hollister laughed. But nobody joined him. His power had disappeared. He was arrested without a single shot being fired. Not because he had suddenly become weak, but because he could no longer hide. Later that evening, Elias and Clara sat quietly beside the cattle pens. The Texas heat was finally fading. For a while neither spoke. Then Elias said, "I won't pretend this makes up for what happened." Clara looked at him. "It doesn't." Elias nodded. "I just don't want to add another wrong to the ones I've already made." Clara was silent for a moment. Then she said, "That's enough. For today." They didn't make promises. They didn't rush into anything. They simply sat there and talked about ordinary things. Horses, water, the wind, the road ahead. Respect came first. Time would decide the rest. Weeks passed. The newspaper published the story. Hollister lost the thing he valued most: control. Elias was cleared of the charges. There was no parade. No celebration. Just a chance to return to the quiet life he had nearly lost. Clara could have left. But she chose to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Because, for the first time, the choice was hers. And perhaps that is the real lesson of the story. We cannot change the moment when we made a mistake. We cannot erase the moment when we looked where we shouldn't have looked, spoke when we shouldn't have spoken, or stayed silent when we should have stood up. But we can choose what happens next. Elias didn't become a better man because he won a fight. He became better because he admitted he was wrong. He stopped. He listened. He gave Clara back the dignity that the world had tried to take from her. And Clara survived not because someone else was strong for her, but because she refused to surrender her sense of self. The past cannot be rewritten, but the next choice is always yours. Sometimes doing the right thing late is still better than never doing it at all. And sometimes the greatest courage is not pulling a gun. Sometimes it is standing in the light with empty hands and finally telling the truth.